Today is Saturday, February 13th, 2021, and this video is about our glorified bodies in heaven. And I want to start with this verse, Matthew chapter 22, verse 30, and this is Jesus Christ speaking. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. And I think this is probably the best description that we have in the Bible of what it's going to be like. And I think that it's good that it keeps it to the point of saying, well, we're going to be more angelic in nature. And I guess the reason that I like that explanation is because it shows you that it's not going to be something that we're going to be able to explain, really. And there's this thought experiment about consciousness. Can we really understand the consciousness of another organism, of another biological entity? And right there's a lot of animals that seem very similar to us. They probably have some sort of level of consciousness. Do we know what it's like to be a bat? And I think the answer is no. We can come up with analogies, what it might be like to see with sonar or something like that. Do they actually see images? Is there any way that we could ever know for certain how the existence of a bat is? I think the answer is no. We can make guesses, but unless you've actually been a bat, you don't know what bat consciousness is like. Same thing, I believe we will keep our individuality, and we'll get to that later in this video, but I think that our body will just be so fundamentally different that it's just impossible for us to really know right now what it's going to be like. And I guess it's worth pointing out here, if anybody ever talks to you about the afterlife, or if they claim, oh, I've been to heaven and this is what it was like, this is what it sounded like, they are liars. Those people are just liars. And it's the same people who they pretend that God has these one-on-one conversations with them. Very obvious ways to know that these people are phony if they're making these grand claims like that. I just don't think that that's how spirituality works right now. God's not having those one-on-one conversations with us. And I don't believe that people can go visit heaven if they have a near-death experience or something like that. I just don't believe in that. And so you have to go to Scripture. And I think most importantly, one of the big themes of this video that I'm going to be talking about is how if you try to look up anything today about the Bible, everything is so Paul-centric, and it's just like going to a 501c3 church. These people worship Paul. They talk so much more about Paul than they do about Jesus. When I think about our glorified bodies in heaven, I think Jesus is the one who gives us the best explanations. But if you go online and you try to research about, oh, what are our bodies going to be like in heaven, you get Paul, 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 Paul. And it really annoys me, especially when you know that Paul is a snake. Anyways, I don't want this video to turn into that, but it is one of the main points of this video is when you go out there and you try to research stuff, all the answers are so Paul heavy. And think of how plastic and phony Christians are today. There's a direct connection between people who worship Paul like an idol and plastic Christians. And it's because Paul preached his own gospel. Okay, for instance, there have been some who have objected the idea of literal resurrection of the dead, and then look at they appeal to Paul. And Paul's logic is like very cyclical and backwards sometimes. Paul, a lot of times when I read Paul stuff, it's like he's speaking hot air, talking in circles, saying much but not saying anything at the same time. But there is no resurrection from the dead, then Christ is not risen. I don't even agree with the logic whatsoever. And it's just weird that this is the verse that they choose to show that we're resurrected, even though Jesus Christ himself talks about the resurrection. So why would these people choose an obscure Paul verse that it's like, I don't even see how the verse applies, when there's verses where Jesus Christ himself said these things, but they're not picking those ones. I just think it becomes really obvious that, you know, the earth that we live in right now is highly corrupted. We're fallen. I just think that everybody should know that a big problem with modern Christianity is this Pauline worship rather than focusing on Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ's words. I don't even care if you don't agree with me that Paul is a snake. You still shouldn't be listening to a mere apostle, somebody who only called himself an apostle. You should be listening to Jesus first, always. So it's a huge problem that I see with Christianity is people worship Paul more than Jesus Christ, the Messiah. It makes me sick. Okay, continuing on. Uh, the resurrected body of the believer will in some ways be like the resurrected body of Christ. I think that's a pretty reasonable conclusion, because Jesus Christ was here in the flesh, and then we also read a lot of times about Jesus's like a second type of body that's shining brightly, glorified body. So since Jesus came in the flesh like us, I think it makes complete sense that when we're resurrected, we'll be like he was after his resurrection. I agree with this. Makes complete sense. They give two examples. John talked about this, and then this Paul one. I think that this is a good example of Paul really not saying anything, but and talking about transforming, who Christ will transform our lowly body, that it may be conformed to his glorious body, according to the working by which he is able even to subdue all things to himself. Like, can you just talk normal? Since these verses are not in KJV, I'm just showing them in KJV here. So this is where John was talking about when we appear, we'll be like him. And then here's Paul talking in circles. And here Paul talks about our bodies as being vile. Like, I don't know if I don't think that our bodies right now are the best, but I wouldn't call God's creation of the body vile. So just moving on, this is John chapter 20. After 8 days, starting at verse 26, and after 8 days again his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. Then came Jesus, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, Peace be unto you. So here what's actually going on, and this is a really cool topic, thinking about things like this. I think that this is a fun thing to talk about, that more people should talk about. These are like things that we can look forward to. Teleportation is something that we will have the ability to just appear in a locked room. That's what's going on in this verse. John chapter 20, verse 26, there is a door being shut, and Jesus is just appearing in the middle of everybody. So I agree that this is biblical verses telling us one aspect of what life will be like in the kingdom. We will be able to just appear in the middle of a shut room and say, hey guys, what's up? Or peace be unto you. Then saith he to Thomas, Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. So these are verses showing that we will have physical bodies. They still were able to actually touch Jesus. And I think that this also kind of shows that we will have some sort of control over our body. And like, I think Jesus was able to choose to have those wounds there. Like, I think Jesus can clearly have himself healed if he wants to. So anyways, I think Jesus probably chose to still have the wounds so that he could show them and say, hey, look, it's me. Here's some Luke chapter 24, starting at verse 39. Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit hath not flesh and bones, as ye see me have. And when he had thus spoken, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they yet believed not for joy, and wondered, he said unto them, Have ye here any meat? And they gave him a piece of broiled fish and of a honeycomb. So we'll still eat. And so Jesus, after the resurrection, Jesus still ate. And I don't know if this is showing that he'll be hungry. I don't think that eating will be the same thing. I don't think it's going to be like, oh, we're starving. I think it might just be, I don't know, more for the enjoyment. I have no idea. I don't know. But then there's this in Revelation. Revelation chapter 22, verse 2. In the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of nations. It has been suggested before. There's some militant vegan Christians out there, which I don't have a problem. Choose to eat whatever you want. But they like to point out about how in heaven, I don't think we're going to eat meat. And I think that might be true, because there's the verses too about carnivores laying down. The lion is going to lay down with the lamb or the sheep or whatever. I forget exactly what it is. The wolf with the sheep. Yeah, we might not eat meat, but there might be very interesting fruits. I just imagine that these fruits are going to be like things that we can't even imagine. So I personally really love mangoes. I think mangoes are just an amazing fruit. And So I think that it'll be maybe something like a mango, but even crazier, and then maybe something like a pineapple. I have no idea. But just something fun to think about. There will be new things. Life will be, it'll have similar elements. We'll still eat, I guess, but there will be these 12 fruits on the tree of life. And yeah, I don't think that I can quite understand what it will be like exactly. But so here's Luke chapter 20, starting at verse 35. But they which shall be accounted worthy to obtain that world and the resurrection from the dead. So here, I think that this just proves that why do people today love Paul so much, and they always want to give examples of Paul. Well, Paul said this, Paul said that, instead of going to Jesus. When that website was talking about some people don't even think about resurrection, they should have been, well, Jesus Christ himself mentions resurrection in this verse. To me, it just makes me angry when I see, why are you focusing so much on Paul instead of talking about Jesus? Okay, so continuing. And the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor given in marriage, neither can they die any more, for they are equal unto the angels and are the children of God, being the children of the resurrection. So here, this would have been a great verse to show Jesus clearly told us that we will be resurrected, being the children of the resurrection. Okay, a much better, clearer example proving the point than whatever they chose Paul saying. Now that the dead are raised, even Moses showed at the bush when he called the Lord the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. We'll get to Moses in a second. I think there was something else that I wanted to point out. Yeah, I guess this is where I'll just point out something. To me, it seems like there's still two really big lessons that I don't understand quite. The time speeding up thing, I know that there's a lot of lessons there. One being you have to simplify your life and focus on what's important. But the time thing, it's really hard coping with that. And it's still something that I don't understand. And then the inversion thing, the gender inversion thing, what's the lesson from that? I don't know. Why do men and women have to exist anyways? If in the end we're going to go back to becoming like the angels, why did men and women have to exist like this to begin with? Why did God do that? God is masculine, but God doesn't have like a goddess aspect. So just a lot of things that I think about. What is the purpose of this gender inversion thing? The very first thing, when a free martin finds out what they are, like 99.9% of the time, they just want to be a real man, whatever that means. And yeah, I don't know the lesson here. I don't know the lesson. I've never lived that. I'm in a unique position. What is it going to be like when we're in heaven? What's it going to be like in heaven for a woman versus a man when we go to heaven? Will we be the same? I don't know. But this says we'll be more like angels. So some verses that I should have looked for, some verses talk about masculine angels. So even though we become more angel-like, we still might retain. See, I don't know. Will that all go away? It says that we don't marry. Are we not going to have sexual organs? I don't know. Leave a comment. What do you think? And yeah, so a lot of questions. And thinking about, the lesson. When a free martin goes to heaven, will they be a masculine spirit? How does this all work? Will spirits not have a masculine or a feminine aspect to it? I don't know. So here's Moses, Exodus chapter 34, verses 29 through 35. I'm not going to read all of them. And it came to pass when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mount, that Moses wist not that the skin of his face shone while he talked with him. And when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come nigh him. And Moses called unto them. So continuing on, people were scared. Until Moses had done speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. Interesting that on verse 33, Moses puts a veil on his face. So this is just talking about it's like another form of the body. Clearly here, I think Moses still had his regular body, but maybe Jesus was just showing them a more glorified form. So Daniel chapter 12, and they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. So I guess here's another point about the Bible. And again, where the websites out there, they'll reference some Paul thing that it doesn't even seem like it's applying at all. There's a lot of parts in the Bible that make it clear that it's not like a communist one-size-fits-all thing. Depending on what you did in life here, it seems like we're going to start off at different places when we get to heaven. And we have eternity to do whatever, so who knows what that means. I don't know the implications of that. Maybe we'll be able to all progress at that point at our own pace. I don't know. But there are multiple instances of the Bible where it does seem like, some trees bear 30 fruit, some trees bear 100 fruit. And it does seem like, depending on how much fruit you bear, it will be a little bit different when you get to heaven. And I'm not saying that as like a works-based salvation thing. It's just, it seems like that's the way that it works based off of reading scripture. And I don't think that should be a motivation for people to go be phony and try to do good works to, of course that's evil. When people want to go out and do good works because they want to get a reward out of it, that's evil. That's not how it's supposed to work. Anyways, it just seems, because these are two different things. Wise people will shine like the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars. I think that it's just showing that there's going to be some differences. And I have more verses too. Many shall... So look at the next verse. It's just a very important Bible verse. Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. It's an end times prophecy that has been fulfilled. Many shall run to and fro. People have said that has something to do with the mass transit that is now back in line. And maybe this is as in the days of Noah. They probably had airplanes and trains and things in the days of Noah, and inverts and things like that, hormone therapy. They just didn't talk about it. And the Bible just didn't talk about it, I don't think. Or it was removed. I have no idea. But most importantly, and knowledge shall be increased. And you can think of this in terms of, well, now everybody has access to the internet. A lot of people cite modern technology as fulfillment of this prophecy, which I agree with. But also I think the lifting of the veil in 2017, that was the real knowledge being increased. Access to the internet, that's just like more ability to program people, propaganda. But it did... I mean, now almost everybody today, well, a lot of people today know how to read, whereas in times past, less people knew. Stuff like that also gets cited as knowledge shall be increased in the end. Now, basically, anybody living in a modern country basically knows how to read and write, and that hasn't always been the case. Anyways, a little tangent, side topic. Matthew chapter 13, starting at verse 43. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. Again, the kingdom... Oh, and these are just two parables I really like. The treasure of the field and the merchant seeking goodly pearls. So these verses we're just talking about, our bodies in heaven are going to shine brightly. And I want to point out, I guess, that you know how when Moses' face was shining brightly, or whenever people ran into angels, they were trembling and in fear, and it's like too bright to look at it. So I think that we will shine brightly, but our perception will be different. I don't think when an angel looks at another angel, they're like, "Ah, you're so bright." So I think that our perception will change as well. And a lot of descriptions in the book of Revelation talking about things are made of all these different gemstones, and the streets are like transparent glass. It's really hard to imagine, and maybe that's because it's through our perception now, but when we're there in our glorified body, it may look completely different. This was a really interesting... So I'm not totally talking down on these mainstream sources. There are a lot of good points that people bring up on these very mainstream, vanilla Bible sources. That's why discernment is so important, because a lot of what they spew out is a bunch of garbage, but then sometimes they have really interesting ideas. I thought this was just a really interesting idea that maybe Adam and Eve were clothed in a type of light, and when they ate the forbidden fruit, the light they maybe lost their light clothing, and that's why they realized that they were naked. And maybe they didn't know that they were naked because they were bathed in some sort of light. Maybe they had clothing on, but it was light clothing. So I actually thought that was a really interesting thing from this mainstream article. So here again, they just love to talk about Paul. The new body of the believer will be perfected in the righteousness of Jesus Christ. And then they show something by Paul. I'm confident of this, that the one who began a good work among you will bring it to completion by the day of Jesus Christ. I don't see how that verse has anything to do with our bodies when we're in heaven, but they just like to slap. Have you guys noticed that people like to take verses and just pretend like they're saying stuff that it's like, I don't even see at all how this applies to our glorified bodies. So I alluded to this earlier. This is crazy how they go so far out of their way to use Paul stuff over and over and over again. It's like, why do you people worship Paul instead of Jesus? I worship Jesus. Okay, we will keep our own unique identity. Paul wrote, by his power, God raised the Lord from the dead, and he will raise us also. And they're saying that his use of the word us here proves that our individuality will be kept. This verse doesn't say how he will raise us up. What if he will raise us up as one being, as the body of Christ? I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying I don't think that this statement standalone proves anything about our identities being kept at all, just because he uses the word us. So whatever. I picked this verse, Revelation chapter 22, verses 12 and 13. Phony plastic Christians don't like to talk about verses like this that tell you that works are important. And no, this is not the same thing as works-based salvation. Nobody can get to the Father except through Jesus Christ. It doesn't matter how many good works you do. Without Jesus Christ, you're not going to heaven. I agree with that. I understand that. However, works are important. And these verses, it's just very obvious that works are important. Revelation chapter 22, verses 12 and 13. And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me, to give every man according as his work shall be. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. So I think that this is one example of Jesus told us that we're going to keep our individuality, because look, every man gets according to his own work. Everyone will be judged for themselves. And that is a much better proof of us keeping our identity than whatever this verse is from Paul. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, not much I can say. I think there's some interesting things. We're not going to marry. So whoever was your wife, or yeah, interesting things to think about. So maybe why they say till death do us part, because they know that in heaven we're not going to marry it. See, but what happens to our old marriages? I don't know. A lot of stuff about earth, a lot of stuff about what happens here, we're going to forget. So yeah, more questions than answers, but somebody wanted me to do a video on this, so hopefully you guys enjoyed. God bless everyone.